In this unit, we will be talking about multicultural perspectives in special education. Before we talk about some of the issues of diversity, let us review some of the history related to diversity. We all know that America is called the melting pot basically because it has welcomed individuals with diverse backgrounds, and what we have today in America is something called cultural pluralism, which is basically the thought that people should retain their cultural heritage while participating in society. This helps everyone feel that they are welcome and a part of the American society, even though their origin is not from here. I can actually speak to this with some of my personal experiences. Having come from India, not once have I felt that I am an outsider. I have always been welcomed, and while I do retain my home culture, I am able to fully participate in society. However, we must note that there are a lot of challenges to the diversity that is present in America, and there are a number of factors that have been identified that put children who are from a different cultural and linguistic background. So, let's talk about some of these challenges. The first one is poverty, which is really critical. It is often found that students from a poor background are at risk of being identified with a disability or being left behind academically. The other issues are limited health care, migrant lifestyles, homelessness, and all of these play a very important role in a child's life. And what is important to note is that you cannot control any of these things, but as an educator, you can make most of your time familiarizing and getting to know your students. Let's continue talking about challenges with come with diversity. There are a number of factors that have been identified, and these are all related because now we are talking about inferior schools. Why would that happen? Poverty plays a big role in students attending inferior schools. We as educators must also keep in mind that students have a unique learning style, and coming from a different cultural or linguistic background makes the student's learning style even more unique. So we must be aware of those factors as well. We often find that students who are from a different cultural or linguistic background experience school failure, and this could be because parents are migrating from one country to another, and also the fact that they don't have the supports necessary to be successful. There is also increased likelihood of being identified with a disability, and this is mainly because of these challenges. We also know that sometimes children from diverse backgrounds suffer with English language acquisition and are often found to be the ones who drop out of school. What is important to note is that those are all the things that we as educators can impact. We might not be able to take away those factors, but what we can do is to make a difference in a child's life by understanding their unique characteristics and working with students of unique backgrounds. So now the question is, how are linguistic and diversity defined? Cultural diversity implies to students whose backgrounds differ from mainstream American society. For example, I come from India. I come from a different culture. Somebody from China, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, etc., would all be students from different cultural societies. So, what about linguistic diversity? Linguistic diversity is when the language at home is not English. So, once again, coming from India, my native language is not English. However, I had the opportunity to be educated in an English medium school. So, even though my first language is not English, it is Hindi, I had the opportunity to learn English in India. And this is very common in India that people know multiple languages. So, for example, I'm fluent in 5 languages, and it makes a total of 6 if I include English. So, linguistic diversity is when your native language is not English. When we talk about students from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, we can say that they face additional challenges that negatively impact school success. And once again, given my personal example, the first course that I took when I came to the US as a grad student was a course in assessment. And the first assignment that I got back was completely covered in red because my professor had so much feedback for me. 99% of those errors were because of the use of British English. When I had used terms like learnt, Learnt, which is not a word here. And I had to overcome these linguistic challenges. And like I said, since I could read, write, and understand English, it was not that much of a challenge. But yes, it was very, very frustrating. Moreover, it is not just with writing, it is also with how I say things. I still have a very strong accent, but it is sometimes but it's something that I have grown with, and at the same time, it becomes very, very challenging. So, for example, there are certain ways that I say a particular word is different from how the word is said here, and that too in the beginning was very, very challenging and frustrating for me to overcome. Now let's talk about characteristics of students from diverse culturally and linguistic backgrounds. So the difference could be in language, home and school culture, and also behavior. These differences may be interpreted by some as a disability or they could be interpreted as a problem. Giving you another example, personal example, when I came here and I did a presentation, I used the word developed, but now how I said it was different. I said it as developed, and most of my peers in my class just stared at me, thinking about what I was saying. I was saying the same word but in a different way, and it actually took me days to practice to I had to practice saying it in the American way. And even now it takes me a few seconds to say the word like it is understood here. Home and school culture can be really different. Once again, in India, where we come from, we have a very close knit family. Giving giving you my personal example again. My nephews are born and brought up here. My sister stays in Delaware. And when my nephew was in preschool, he came home one day crying because his teacher had asked him about how many brothers and sisters he had. And he said that he has one brother and one sister. And the teacher insisted that he did not have a sister. Now, it is true that he doesn't have a sibling who is a girl. But in India, cousins are considered to be sisters. So when he was saying he had a sister, he was coming from the home culture that we grew up in. Now let's talk about the differences in behavior. And I have a funny story about myself. This is about the first speeding ticket that I ever got in the US. When the cops started following me, I stopped, but not realizing that I was required to sit in the car with my hands on the steering wheel. In India, out of respect, the first thing you would do is get out of the car and stand up, and that is exactly what I did. Of course, I got yelled at and have never made that mistake again. But then again, it was a behavior that I had to change. None of the examples I gave you can be interpreted as a disability, but they could definitely be considered as a problem. So, who are students who are linguistically diverse? There are many, but not all are culturally diverse. Many are English language learners. Their native language is not English. It is often difficult to detect the difference between language impairment and difficulty with a language. As a professional working with students, you will have to be very careful. Just because students are from a different culture does not mean that their language is different. Approximately 10% of our school population are considered to be linguistically diverse. A characteristic that comes forward in this case is called code switching. That is, students use their home language and English when communicating or within the same communication. I can once again give you my example. When I'm talking to my family, I often find myself code switching all the time. I could be saying one thing using two or three different languages. Just to give you an example, today the weather was beautiful. मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा আমার ইচ্ছে করছিল কি আমি বেড়াতে যাই so it is one sentence but I use three different languages because I'm fluent in all the languages. I can easily switch codes. The majority of academic learning is language based. Therefore, students who struggle with language will face a distinctive disadvantage in school. And that is why we as teachers have to be careful that students understand the language that teachers are using. If, for example, I come into the classroom and start talking in a language you don't understand, and then I tell you that I will be testing you on what is being taught in class, it will definitely be a big problem. So, we must not assume that all students understand the language of instruction. Now, let's switch gears and talk about diversity in preparation programs known as also known as TEPS. TEPS. Despite the steadily increasing numbers of culturally and linguistically diverse student populations in schools, not all teacher education programs readily embrace multicultural education or culturally responsive teacher education pedagogy. Now let's talk about some of the challenges related to diversity in teacher education programs. Some schools of education have acknowledged the urgency for developing culturally competent teachers, while others grapple with ways to fit appropriate programs into their curriculum. Unconvinced of the academic merits of culturally responsive programming, but not wanting to appear anti diversity, some teacher education programs will grudgingly add a diversity course into their curriculum. Overcoming this resistance is crucial to developing effective teacher education programs that will provide pre service teachers with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions needed to educate diverse learners. A major part of this resistance comes from teacher educators' discomfort, if not fear, of addressing issues such as race and racism in their courses or even on their campuses. Resistance will persist, and children from ethnically and linguistic diverse backgrounds will go unserved until schools and faculty acknowledge the need for culturally competent teachers in the classroom and the responsibility of teacher education programs to properly prepare these teachers. Coupled with this acknowledgement must be a willingness to truly value and celebrate diversity in programming and practices. So, what should be done to create teacher education programs that are mindful of diversity? Unfortunately, most pre service teachers lack the knowledge, skills, dispositions, and experiences needed to teach ethnically and linguistically diverse students. Research suggests that when teachers have had the benefit of multicultural teacher education preparation, they are likely to embrace cultural deficit views. Moreover, teachers who have learned culturally responsive pedagogy are more confident and believe they are effective in their instruction of diverse children. Despite the growing ethnic and linguistic diversity in our classroom today, teacher education programs continue to utilize pedagogy of decades past. Our schools need teachers who know who they are teaching, what to teach, and methodologies to teach them. In other words, we need teachers who can use quality research based pedagogy, that is, pedagogy responsive to the learning, emotional, and social needs of ethnically and linguistically diverse students with and without disabilities in urban schools. There is a dire need for teacher education programs to offer many and varied cross cultural experiences. Teachers need to know how to adapt the content of instruction and teaching styles. Curriculum, methodology, and instructional materials should be responsive to students' values and cultural norms. Thus, the ultimate challenge for teacher education programs is to prepare reflective practitioners who connect, commit, and practice an ethos of care with diverse students and their families. In order to do so, teacher educators need to develop cohesive and comprehensive multicultural curricula in general and special education teacher education programs. They must infuse multicultural principles throughout to prepare teachers to respond to the need of diverse learners and their families. They should be able to identify critical teaching behaviors and essential best practices for diverse students. There are six salient characteristics of culturally responsive teachers. The first one being socio-cultural consciousness, which means understanding that one's way of thinking, behaving, and being is influenced by race, ethnicity, social class, and language. Therefore, teachers must critically examine their own socio-cultural identities and the inequalities between schools and society that support institutionalized discrimination to maintain a privileged society based on social class and skin color. Teacher candidates or professionals must inspect and confront any negative attitudes they might have towards cultural groups. The next characteristic is an affirming attitude towards students from culturally diverse backgrounds, and this significantly impacts their learning belief in self, and overall academic performance. By respecting cultural differences and adding education related to the culture of students, programs must be inclusive. The next salient feature is commitment and skills to act as agents of change, which enables the prospective teacher or professional to confront barriers, obstacles to change, and develop skills for collaboration and dealing with chaos. As agents of change, teachers and professionals assist schools in becoming more equitable over time. The next salient feature is constructive view of learning, which contends that all students are capable of learning and teachers must provide scaffolds between what students already know through their experiences and what they need to learn. Constructivist teaching promotes critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, and recognition of multiple perspectives. Learning about students' past experiences, home and community culture, and world both in and outside school helps build relationships and increasing the prospective teachers or professionals' use of these experiences in the context of teacher and learning. Last but not the least is culturally responsive teaching strategies must be adopted. These strategies must support the constructivist view of knowledge, teaching, and learning. As teachers assist students to construct knowledge and build on their personal and cultural strengths, and examine the curriculum from multiple perspectives, an inclusive classroom environment is created. There are several implications of cultural responsive teacher education programs, and we'll be talking about in the next slide. This slide basically outlines classroom based practices essential to promoting the development of culturally responsive teachers. Some of these developing dispositions, knowledge, and skills are listed in this slide. Some being reflective practice, the use of simulation and games, exploring family histories, articulating sociocultural affiliations, exploring personal history and development, and learning about history and current experiences. We can therefore say that teacher education programs play a critical part in giving prospective teachers and professionals opportunities to learn and use culturally relevant pedagogy, implementing curricula and field experiences that are committed to diversity enables future practitioners to engage in pedagogy with insight and view that all communities and they view all communities as resources for learning and social justice.